Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to the Nonprofit Renaissance. We're excited to be jumping back in with a super special guest today. I'm one of your co-hosts, Colin. This is
H.
And we are super excited today. So, H, why don't you tell us who we're with today?
Special friend, special guest, and you're in for a treat today. And known him for over 2 decades, which is what got so many stories. We may have to do an extended version of the podcast, but
PG.
Yeah, we're gonna PG, please. There's so many stories, but pumped because I know this episode's gonna help you listening right now in what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish, the money you're trying to raise, the strategies you're trying to implement. But I'm gonna let him tell you what he's up to these days because he's got so many hats on that I forget what the latest one is, but he's done them all successfully and with great impact across the United States and beyond and abroad, actually, because he's done it around the world. Lived in Italy, he's done mission work across the world. But ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's cue the applause for the one and only Dave Lopez. Welcome.
Hey, I don't have my button on this one, so I'll put it in post. Don't worry.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Big
it's good to be with you
crowd,
guys.
big crowd,
Yeah, big crowd.
Dave, currently senior generosity strategist specialist at Generis.
Yeah.
Right? Tell what does Generis do? What do you do there? And then we'll start from there.
So Generis helps churches in the space of financial development, if you will, advancement, basically to help churches, and not just churches, but like faith-based nonprofits, schools, universities, seminaries, K through 12, whatever, thrive financially. Almost always they're calling us to figure out, hey, we need to expand something, grow something, build something. How do we do that? We help them navigate those pathways. Every single entity is different because of context or culture. So we learn a lot about both, and then we craft a pathway, and then we journey with you through that pathway, man.
So do you show up and you just give them money? That's what you do?
No.
Oh, okay. So just make that clear.
Because here's the thing, like
Not that easy.
we could do that, and I guess we could, but I would not be the best consultants for that, right? I guess we could, but really, the point is, you can get a gift, but if you don't know how to steward it, not just now, but for the long haul, then what's the point? And so a lot of times, especially like in the West, the concept of fundraising is I need to build something now and then that's it. That's not how you build culture. That's how you create a project. No one's life is changed when you build a project. I mean, yeah, we have hospital, whatever. But if you can't sustain that for like the next iteration of whatever the ministry or organization is going to be, then you didn't really grow, and your capacity to impact lives is either hit a lid or it's diminishing.
Love it. Listen, we're going to get into some more fundraising tips and hacks and tricks and legal and illegal. So stay tuned. This is going to be one. But Dave,
That's the ladders for our subscription, our subscribers.
Patreon.
That's right.
Yeah,
We have a
yeah.
Patreon. We're going to start a
Yeah.
Patreon just for this episode. No, we don't. But no, just some context.
That's how you fundraise, by the way.
We're doing it.
You're
There-
welcome.
There it is. We're done, guys. Thanks for the evidence. But Dave, just some context for our listeners. You've been an executive pastor. You've been a church planter. Started churches. Have led at high level. Missionary, international missionary. Have led nonprofits. I remember Hope for Miami, Caring for Miami, donor developing, writing grants. Your experience in it has been intense. Give us a little insight on what you're doing today through Generis, what you're also doing through some of the other organizations and nonprofits you're involved in.
So I live in a couple of different spaces. One is consulting through Generis, and that's where, again, nonprofits, churches, helping them thrive to meet their God-sized vision. I get to partner with other entities. One is, in particular, is Florida Baptist Financial Services. So it's still in the area of stewardship, but it's a very different thing. So it's not capital campaigns and those kinds of things. This is more estate planning and church investments, that kind of a thing. Most of the time, churches are trying to figure out how to make it week to week. The estate planning conversation or end of life plan is not checkers, but chess. It's long-term strategic planning. So helping people think about a plan, a will, a trust, what makes sense. The data tells us that about, I think it's like 14% of the U.S. population has a plan for when they go home. I don't know about you, but everyone's going to go home. Jesus went home. He's the one who came back, but even he went home. And if you don't have a plan in place, I'm sorry?
14%?
14% has a plan. That means 86 do not, right?
Yeah.
So when I'm in a room with a handful of people, it's like, hey, there's 100 of us. 14 might put their hands up, right? Okay. But here's the hard part about it. Usually the intent is I want to leave something to my kids, to the people I love, ministries, etc. But if you don't have that clearly spelled out, the government has a plan for your stuff. And usually it's not including those people first, if at all. So I do some consulting with them in that space. Always exciting. Right now, serving as a senior pastor as well. Cornerstone Miami Church. We started it about 8 years ago.
Shout out.
Co-vocational from day one. That's kind of been the design on purpose. I'm a dad, a husband, and
You're giving me anxiety, man. It's
because you're a slacker, Colin.
You're not. Listen. Well, that's next episode. But oh man, you got a lot going on, man.
Man, it's one of those where you look at the last 15, 20 years and figure, like, how did we get here? Well, when you look back, it's like, okay, God's been working and building us to get us to this spot. A lot of learning, a lot of mistakes. That's how we get here.
There you go.
Well, let's jump right in there. End of life, giving, planning. So who's end of life? The person, the organization, both?
Yeah, because those don't intuitively seem to go together. You've got, capital campaigns for like a church and then end of life planning. And, how does that all fit together?
Yeah. So I would encourage everyone to kind of take a step back from it and just recognize that at the top of it, it's a stewardship conversation.
Sure.
All of it is, right? So we tend to like put it into like clean pots. It's a will or it's capital campaign. And before any of it, it's a stewardship thing. And so if it really is a stewardship chat that's long term, that's really culture shaping, culture building for me and the generations that are going to come, honestly, they don't necessarily have to be so distinct.
Yeah.
If you're doing a capital campaign, you'll find that a lot of people may not be able to have huge gifts today, but they can all make a huge gift when they pass. And so there's a way to connect those dots to a bigger vision.
Yeah.
But those gifts won't come unless you learn to have those chats, which, man, I went to seminary at like almost every level. And here's what I know. That conversation of stewardship, generosity, estate planning, end of life stuff, like there's no class on that.
Right.
For just real quick, for those who maybe the word stewardship is not in their everyday vocabulary, that can be a church word. Give a 30-second. When you say stewardship, what do you really mean?
So what I'm talking about is God has entrusted everybody in every space of life with responsibilities. Sometimes it's a relationship, sometimes it's stuff. We're all called to manage those things. And here's how we know we're not owners but managers. When we go home to be with Jesus, we leave it all behind. None of it is ours, right? So how do we manage or steward our marriages, our kids? But how do we manage and steward our work and the responsibilities entrusted to us in those places? And then from the resource that God gives to us to build or to grow our own personal or professional ministries, how do we manage and steward that? Resources, finances, relationships, that kind of a thing.
Great.
Dave, give us a little bit of the secret sauce here. So we're not paying you for this. I don't think, right, Colin?
I'm not. That's not. That's not.
Okay, cool.
I don't
just making sure
that at all. Yeah.
For our CFOs listening, let them
They
know.
would never allow me to get close to that.
Some tips. So if a leader's listening right now and that has not crossed their mind,
Yeah.
we were talking, I think, in the next 20 years, are we talking billions or trillions of money on the
Yeah,
table?
in the next, actually, when the boomers pass, right, in the next 15, 20 years, they're anticipating about 32 to 35 trillion passing from one generation to the next.
And where would that go?
Yes. Right?
Exactly.
So
And that's the question to answer, right?
Yeah,
You
it
said
is
the
the question.
government has a plan. I think I know their
They
plan
do.
with that number. Yeah.
So every now and then you'll hear people talk about the death tax. That's what they're referring
Wow.
to, because you've already paid taxes on all this stuff, and for your kids to get it, they're going to have to pay taxes on it again because they view it as earned income, not a gift.
Yeah.
But if you have a plan in place, it's a gift that either has minimal tax implications or, depending how you structure it, none, right?
Yeah.
So there's ways around that.
Okay, so what do I need to tell my dad and my grandpa right now?
Yeah, here's what I would encourage every church leader and every nonprofit leader. If you're part of a denomination, your denomination probably has some kind of a foundation attached to it. Reach out to them, find out what they do. Most of the time, they can come in and do seminars, education, and those kinds of things, and they do a lot of the back-end heavy lifting. Usually, we don't get into that space because we don't know what to do. It has a lot of legal stuff. That's what they do. If you are a church that's non-denominational or a nonprofit that's not connected, there's larger entities that do these kinds of things. National Christian Foundation is a national entity, NCF, Philanthrocorps, and a few others that just kind of play cross tribes. man, reach out to them. They can help you guys get those things set up on the back end.
Yeah.
And just an FYI, the data also tells us that if you make an appeal, about 40% of the people will give something to the appeal. So I can't tell you how big it is, but there's a colleague of mine that was working with a hospital, and their average gift when people passed was about $70,000. Because people have life insurance. Oh, for $1 million, but they don't have access to it now. But when they go home, people leave stuff. Well, 50 gifts of $70K, praise God. That's nice.
So that's an incentive for them to leave, is what I'm hearing?
No. I can't wait for them to die.
You missed it, man. You missed it.
Yeah,
Okay,
a
I'm
little
sorry.
bit.
All right, conspiracytheory.com over here. That explains a lot. So,
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so break it down, just in case it's not clear enough yet. Break it down. Why is that important for some? Like, why does that go beyond someone's just own personal finances and personal decisions? If you have the heart of, I want to impact, I love nonprofit. Why is it important for people to start thinking this way now?
Yeah. So I think what I would tell I'll tell you what I tell people when I do some of these kind of workshops. Your biggest gift to the kingdom hasn't happened yet.
That's good.
Your biggest give actually happens on the day you go home. You just don't know it yet. But without a plan in place, your plan of kingdom impact will not be honored without clarity. Your kids don't know, and your grandkids don't know what's in here or in here, right? Without having something clearly laid out. And the other thing that I would challenge is, like, Colin, do you have kids?
I do. I got 2 kids.
Okay. H, you got 5.
Like 13. So 5? Okay.
So far.
He's chasing the
He's working up
patriarchs. Yeah.
that-
Man,
The tax credit.
yeah, for the next one.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I would encourage you guys to think about is kid number 6 or kid number 3. And people are like, well, which kid is that? Leave something to the church that's going to reach your grandkids or your great grandkids. Leave something to the kingdom. And so usually it's not going to impact how much I'm going to leave to all of my kids, but leave something, right?
Yeah.
That's where I would encourage people to think. And your nonprofit or your church, I just want you to know that if people have a heart space for you, they probably have a heart space for the things you do. People don't give normally because we don't ask well.
Yeah.
Usually it's like a really bad ask or a really cheap ask, but if you can ask well through relationships and through good language and conviction and vision, people will leave something now, but they'll leave something bigger when they do go home.
Can we talk about that ask? Because, what I'm envisioning maybe kind of like a pushback of, like, how could you ask someone to do, or how could, like, talk about that? How do organizations do that in a I don't know, not maybe non-offensive way, but in a way that, like, that really calls someone up to something? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Man, one of the things that I encourage the folks that I work with to always think through, whether it's the campaign ask or the end of life ask or the bigger appeal somewhere in between, people give for 2 reasons. 1, they give because there's a clear, compelling vision. And then 2, there's permission because of a relationship. Right? So the worst thing you can do is ask someone and not have permission to ask.
Right.
Because they're going to look at you and go, que lindo.
They do it every day
right?
at my door, and I'm like, bye.
Right. Because you don't have that, right? Even if the vision was awesome, it's like, I don't know you. Get away from me. Nonprofit leaders and ministry leaders spend countless hours crying, consoling, ministering, serving, caring for, building like a bucket of trust because of relationships, because of conversations, because of gatherings, because of service projects, the whole 9. And in nonprofit world and in church world, we ask all the time. Can you come and help? Can you come and serve? Can you come and lead? Can you come and follow up? Whatever. And if people didn't want to, they would say no, but they choose to. To be honest with you, we leave a lot of resources on the table because we're like, man, I already asked for so much. Listen, if that's the hesitation, here's what I would caution everybody, because it's a normal hesitation that I know comes from a good place, but I think it's theologically upside down. Jesus asks for our time. He asks for our talent. And we do great jobs in church and in ministry asking for both. But when it comes to the talent piece, right, or the treasure piece, that's where we're like, well, here's what I would say. If he doesn't have your time, he doesn't have you. And if he doesn't have your talent, he doesn't have you. And if he doesn't have your treasure, he doesn't have you. part of our call as ministry leaders, regardless of the space, church or nonprofit, is to invite people into the pool. Because again, end of life, but it's also what God does in our current lives that changes and transforms us. That's part of that culture piece.
That's great insight. And Dave, we spoke a little bit about estate and about property. Let's dive into that a little bit. We talked about thinking in centuries, and this is a place where, Catholic Church in the past has done great in thinking in centuries, not just thinking for the moment temporarily, but holding on to property and holding on to that legacy that they've now left behind, including a city, right? They've got a whole city, Vatican, in their name, and
not too far from here.
Not too far. Yes, exactly. So, tell us about that. Any insight on that, from folks donating that to a cause or causes getting rid of those in the moment without long-term thinking?
Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to like real estate and property like that, you'll be surprised what people have. You've heard people say, I'm cash poor, but real estate rich or something like that. When they do pass, it's not uncommon to see somebody leave something to a ministry or a church, a house or a field or something. All of that is real. Again, if you don't ask, the answer is always no.
Sure.
So I'd encourage you guys to ask what people give or what people leave. That's between them and Jesus. But if you don't make the appeal, I'll tell you, you'll be shocked who leaves what. And all the time, people will leave all sorts of stuff where you'll go, a Mickey Mantle baseball card. That's worth $6,000. Holy cow, a baseball card. Praise God. Or 100 acres in the middle of the state that Lennar is hoping to jump on, but they can't because now the valuation of this is up and who knows what, and it gets left to your nonprofit or to your church, and what they do with it, that's their business. In terms of selling stuff, listen, everyone's free to do what they're called to do. I'll just tell you my personal opinion.
This is not professional.
Yeah, this is not legal advice.
Yeah,
this is not legal advice.
Our lawyers have told us to say that. So
yeah. Listen. Here's what I would say. I would encourage nonprofits and churches to reconsider like different uses of space. It's not uncommon where, let's say somebody has 100 acres. Oh, we don't need 100 acres. I know, but somebody does. It's easy to take money today, but recognize, and I would say this to all nonprofit and church leaders, that once you sell it, the likelihood of you being able to buy it again is not high. Because equity continues to grow and price valuation grows with it. And as it does, not only did our footprint shrink, but our ability to have a permanent footprint, right? To set a physical legacy of whatever church or ministry is going to look like, that's almost gone because we took a quick, 15 mil or 5 mil or 200 grand, whatever it is, where you can think about reutilizing that space for a better and higher use. There's an organization I've worked with in the past that there was a church that had like 20 acres, but they only needed 5. And so they actually brought this group in. And we can talk about this group offline after, but they came in and they did an assessment of best and highest use of the property. And what they told the church was, listen, tap into your equity and put an ALF on the furthest side of your building. An ALF. Now, churches aren't in the business of ALF. He said, just put it on there. We'll bring in a charter entity to manage it for you. Now the church not only owns that piece of property, they own the ALF, and so the valuation of that corner has gone up, but annually, the ALF pays rent to the church. So the church not only did not lose their footprint, but now they've got income coming in from a different place to do more ministry that they could not do before without giving up any of their footprint. I would just say churches, nonprofits, listen, before you sell anything, just do the hard work of what's the best and highest use. I know there's money on the table. But again, it might be a short-term gain and a long-term loss.
Yeah, and surround yourself with someone entrepreneurial with experience that's going to look at generating, long-term revenue and income, not just the
someone who knows what an ALF is, because I know what it is.
An assisted living
but some
facility.
other people
they may not know.
Yeah, that was for you guys.
Why don't you tell them? Why don't you tell them what it is called?
It is. He's correct on that. It's an assisted living facility, is what that is. Yeah,
or a school.
I call them ALFs in my. I just
what are you googling right now, Colin? What's
going on? It's like, hey Siri.
Yeah. Hey Siri.
Did you catch that?
Hey Dave. So let's say Colin and I, we're setting up our CNH foundation. We got about $500,000, got us going. We're helping children specifically ours, get fed.
Because we got seven.
Because we
between
got
us.
a bunch.
Yeah.
So it's that foundation.
We have a basketball team.
Yeah.
What and it costs a lot of money. What give me the tips, the tricks, the hacks. What's the latest? You're out there seeing what organizations are doing, what churches, how they're raising. Is it still Krispy Kreme donuts? Is my question, number one. And if not, give us a top three. Give us a top three.
Yeah, so I would say there's some overlap in church world, and I think there's some distinctives from church world and nonprofit world, right? So some overlap is wealth is not distributed equally. Now, you may not like that sentiment. I just want you to know, Matthew 25, Jesus tells us a parable about three dudes. One guy had 5 talents, one guy had 2, and one guy had 1. And by the way, just for full context, that chapter is about the return of Jesus. Like, there's a parable before it and a parable after it, and then he throws this parable about stewardship in the mix.
Hot take. So equality?
Well, no, here's what he's saying. What I'm coming back, but before I do, what you do with your stuff matters significantly, right? Anyway, back to the 5, the 2, and the 1. Jesus didn't say, it's not fair and we got to overthrow the system. Here's what he said. I'm expecting different results, but I'm expecting equal obedience.
Yeah.
Right? To not call people, whether they're low income, middle income, or upper income, to some kind of response and obedience is not on them, but it's on us as the nonprofit ministry leaders, right? But that also implies that we know who they are. So hot take number 1, if you're trying to grow a lot of money really quick, it's not going to be through 100 people giving $50. It's probably going to be through about 5 people giving $100,000. There's a lot of different ways to do that in terms of tactics, but again, some of it boils down to relationships and then permission. Do you have a clear and compelling vision for CNH Foundation besides my kids are hungry?
Yeah.
That's very clear and very compelling to us.
And it might be, but like, why should I care about CNH,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, sure.
Because they may date your daughter one day.
They might. But if CNH Foundation is still there, I'm going to say, sweetheart, that's not the man of God for you. No. Yeah. So, you can do the Krispy Kremes, right? And it's always easier to do that. But I will tell you, you're going to spend 30 hours of work, where if we spent those same 30 hours having critical conversations with, let's say, our mid-tier donors and top-tier donors or potential people, man, your return is going to be more than, oh man, we made a couple $100 on Krispy Kreme or spaghetti dinners or whatever else we want to try. And I think that's one thing that would be true for both nonprofit and church world. Here's what the data tells us. 10% of your donor base gives about 70% of the whole.
Say that again.
10% of your donor base gives about 70% of the whole.
Nationwide, you still see that.
Man, we have seen it in white collar, blue collar. We have seen it in red churches, blue churches. We have seen it in inner city, urban, suburban, rural. And it doesn't matter if it's white church, black church, Hispanic church, Asian church, Indian church. It's like everybody got the memo when it comes to giving. 10% of your donors give about 70% of the whole. Then 30% of your donors give about 25% of the whole. Those are your most involved volunteers usually, right? Your staff, your deacons, and then everybody in between, maybe your board members and your most committed volunteers. That's them. And then 5% of your donors give about 60% or the whole of the whole, which is crazy because that's your pool of largest potential donors who contribute the least amount, which means intuitively, and I would caution everybody, here's the second thing I would tell you. Every church or ministry or nonprofit has at least 4 unique donor audiences. Your high capacity, your mid-level, your low level, and the not yet. Right? So there are people who are probably in your space that like you or like what you do, but they haven't engaged yet. Usually our appeals fall flat because we're talking to one audience, assuming that everybody's part of that audience, and they are not.
Right. The audience is you have money, but that's about it.
Right. And even then, what we know is while 10% of our donors might give the largest, the data also suggests that they might be giving 1 to 2% of their annual income to charitable causes collectively. Their 5 is just so big that we're like, oh, of course this guy's generous. He gave $200,000 last year. Man, he must be like, oh man. If the guy makes $50 million,
capacity is way higher than
the
that.
guy gave 10 minutes worth of work to you and to your ministry or church, because either he's not committed to the clear, compelling vision that may be lacking, or the relationship to invite him deeper isn't there yet.
Yeah.
So what I got is that 10% of the people eat 70% of the Krispy Kremes. Is that right?
Yeah.
That
You're still trying to feed your kids
I'm still
right
trying
now.
to get the Krispy
Yeah,
Kreme
CNH
going.
is not going to take off, guys.
Latest in technology, Dave. You've been at it for a long time. You've seen it evolve.
Mm-hmm.
You used to trade cattle, and now you're crypto.
The days.
So how's
Cattle to crypto.
How's your
That's our
cattle
title.
crypto? How's your Dogecoin? Dogecoin
My
going?
Dogecoin? Well, it's not going anywhere.
Your Moo coin, is that a thing yet?
Yeah, but that's how I transitioned into. No, let's talk about the future, the now, on some of that.
Yeah.
How do organizations set themselves up? One, to receive that. I've heard some tell me, "Oh, that's it's shallow. I'm not going to do that." I feel like you're leaving stuff on the table, and not offering opportunities for folks to contribute, whether it's crypto or other forms of, including end of life giving.
Yeah. So here's usually how that chat goes. When was the last time you wrote a check to an organization? So
A what?
Exactly. When was the last time that you gave meaningfully through cash? And usually that number starts to diminish, right? So how do you normally give today? And then it quickly turns to online. That's like the new paper give. It's a digital give, but it's online. There's a percentage of people that are starting to migrate towards, let's say, text to give or those kinds of options. And then you've got the crypto stuff. Here's what I would encourage anybody who's thinking long term, right? So this is like, again, we're playing checkers every week. How do I pay the bills this week? When we should be playing checkers and chess long term. Your newer emerging donors who are young, it's normal to them. It may not be normal to you, but if really the hope is to feed hungry kids, then I don't care how the resources come in.
Sure.
But then you have to raise the question, do you want to feed hungry kids today or in 40 years too?
It's good.
So you've got to create avenues for all kinds of donors to engage with you and to recognize that some will engage through paper, some will engage through digital, some will engage through online, some will engage through a few different ways. However they choose to engage, though, you've got to have an appropriate response for them, right? So is it just that tacky, like, hey, thanks, no goods were exchanged for your gift? Man, that is transactional giving, not transformational at all. So there's got to be more of we got to curate our language, and then we've got to curate the follow-up, whether it's a text, an email, a phone call, or a handwritten letter, or a combination of the three, which, by the way, the handwritten letter, in the days of automation, it's money. When was the last time you got a handwritten letter from anybody? Could you imagine? CNH writes a letter to Dave Lopez for feeding their 7 hungry, ungrateful kids, right?
I'm gonna have my kids write it for them.
Yeah, seriously. Dear sir, I'm not hungry today, thanks.
Crayon, yeah.
But could you imagine, right, if you get that letter handwritten by someone that says, hey, I took some time today to just say thanks. We saw the gift that came in. No one gives by accident. Man, I appreciate you. And then do like a sequential follow-up that's integrated. Back to the crypto, man, I would encourage everybody. This is where your foundation or entities usually can process crypto for you because they can treat it similar to stock. So they'll receive it, liquidate it, and then send you back whatever the valuation is of that particular day in which it got liquidated. Have it available. Have it available. You're not going to necessarily see like, oh man, we got 50 people, but one crypto transaction on average is about 5 to 10K when it comes in the form of a donation. And it's usually because there's a valuation, I got to sell a piece, or I got a bonus, and so boom, I'm giving some of it away.
So that's a legitimate thing that organizations should at the very least be looking into, is what you're saying. Crypto and that.
I would put all the giving options on the table.
Sure.
30 years ago, people would have said, man, I don't feel like giving online because it's not trustworthy. And I get it, because 30 years ago, like, I don't know. This is the new I don't know.
Yeah.
But it did not stop what occurred. And what we can tell if we forecast and look into the future is it's not going away. What happened with FTX and all that is a speed bump in the crypto convo, but it's not a roadblock. Like, that's not going away. Bitcoin got stronger because everyone moved their stuff and put it into Bitcoin.
It actually validates.
For sure
the currency.
If you look at what the U.S. government is doing, they have the USD, their own version of digital currency that's not the dollar. It's their own version of crypto. They're doubling down on it quietly. Go do some homework. Google it. You know, it's there. It's not going away. I think it'll be the new iteration of other ways to give when checks go the way of the dinosaur.
Yeah.
Eventually one falls off, but when it does, one comes on.
Sure.
It's a great spot for our sponsor, Coinbase. Thank you for Robinhood.
Yeah.
VeChain. Okay.
PJ. PJ.
So, okay.
Crisp.
Krispy Kreme. We're trying. Yeah.
Yeah,
We are all over the
take a
place.
sip and give
Yeah.
a good.
Yeah.
Ready? Hold on.
Fiji. Filter tap water.
From the mountains of Hawaii. Okay.
Refresh your tomorrow.
I did
I
have a question, Colin, before
ahead.
you go. Because I've helped with campaigns, with capital campaigns, with building campaigns, with fundraiser galas, and from $1 million goals to $15 million achievements, which are super successful. The old school, I was always told that organizations, big business, that they're not going to go digital, that they're going to want to write a big fat check, and the envelope needs to be massive so they can fit that envelope, legit. And sometimes that's proven true. Sometimes that hasn't been the case. Now, because have you seen any of that? Is that still true? If big business, they need to give $1 million to that they're going to do it in a paper check?
So when you say big business, you're talking about like a corporate sponsor?
Corporate sponsor, they're going to write it, and they're
Yeah, I mean they have to. It's part of their feel good approach of what they do. So
There's
that's
not a
usually
lot of
when you say-
publicity when
yeah.
you hit the send, on your computer.
No, and I'm not even talking about the PR, approach, the PR stunt of showing the big check and somebody holding it up in the photo op. Literally, that they're going to have to print and sign and get 4 board members to sign it. And
Correct.
And
per their governance and bylaws, for sure.
because I've seen it, and again, I've seen it at play. One time, it cost the organization I was working with, I think $5,000 more to get these envelopes in hand. And I was like, really, we need to spend that $5K, and it yielded an additional $200K because that came through those envelopes,
Yeah.
which at one point was not going to be, I was just curious if that's still the case.
Yeah, but again, remember, this is where knowing your audience, right? So we talked about different. What I did not talk about is the corporate side of stuff. So in the corporate game, fundraising there is totally different than talking to humans, right? Because you're talking to humans who run an organization or some type of for-profit entity. Their values, their approach, their PR, what do they get out of it? Like it's never just a one-way give, usually with a corporate sponsor like Fiji, right? It's usually like, hey, we have to have product placement, or we are your go-to paper company, Dunder Mifflin, or whatever you're going to do. So there's more of a give and take in those kinds of relationships. And, it takes a little bit longer to cultivate those. Historically, they're not massive unless there's a key relationship with the executive director, the senior pastor, or a key trustee or board member who is either the boss of this corporate entity or sits in a high position of trustees within those groups. Other than that, they're going to be like $2,500, and it's Christmas time, and we give 50 checks out. Man, I've gotten those in the past where, company X gave out $1 million, but in 1,000 gifts.
Yeah, they diversify. They spread it.
For sure.
Yeah.
But that way they can say, look at all of the good that we did through all of these. We helped to serve 60 million people with $2,500 each.
Yeah.
Okay. Whatever helps you sleep.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this, for all of the time and effort that it goes into cultivating those, if you spent that much time with high capacity individuals, you would 10x your result, your gift response much quicker.
That's good.
Much quicker.
Yeah. You talked about Gen Z in the coming generations. You talked about becoming more modern in your currency. So outside of that, what do organizations, churches, and nonprofits need to be doing to capture Gen Z and millennials outside of like just get with the times? I guess you could say. How else should they focus on securing these this large group that's coming into adulthood, as potential and future and current donors?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think this is why organizations like yours matter. The future is storytelling. It's funny. It's almost like we're going back to the days of cave people, where we're not pre-literate, but we are in a post-literate culture. So the storytellers are the people who will shape the future. In the same way that when we were illiterate, we passed down history through story, history is going to be created through storytelling again. The best storytellers are going to be the ones who will be able to capture the minds and hearts of people. If you look at some of the things happening today on who's on what side or whatever, it's because there's a narrative that's being spoken, and whoever does the best job telling that story goes, I captured the biggest audience. True or not, it does not matter, right? Man, I think that's going to be a key way. So what is the story we're telling? How are we telling it? Like, what are the different avenues? I for sure think that what you guys do in terms of like media, multimedia, the different avenues and all that, whether it's digital, video, online, all of that is essential. I honestly think too, the kneecap to kneecap conversation is right now being underplayed, but it has so much impact, man. Time is the currency of the day, where I'm going to spend an experience with you. Hey, we're going to go somewhere fishing for like 4 hours, and we're going to rub shoulders to shoulders and potentially not catch anything, but share a life and then cast vision and then share a life again. And in that moment, we're going to create a memory around a bigger story. Boom. I think for a lot of our younger folks coming into creating a space for them to engage and see how their stories fit into the big story of your ministry or nonprofit is a big, big key to it as well. Yeah. If people cannot see themselves in whatever it is you're trying to do, they don't identify. The faster they can see themselves, the faster they go, that's my story too. Yeah, I want to be a part of something like that. And then inviting them to give, right? Inviting them to be a part of that. And some of the things that I would encourage nonprofits and leaders. So there's a lot of easy things to consider that we've learned. So whether you do Disney Plus or Netflix, there's a subscription approach. In the nonprofit world, I'd encourage everyone to look at easy on-ramp ways so that no one has to feel like I can't give a lot, so I won't do a lot.
To activate and engage, right?
Absolutely. Yep. It's like, hey, what would it look like to become a CNH family partner? Well, what does that mean? Man, for $10 a month, you can do this, this, and this. Really? Man, is that transformational to everybody? No, but it's a starting point, right? And that's the essential thing. We got to remember that giving is a lifelong journey, so you don't arrive, and everybody's at a different place within that journey. Some people just need to start. Well, if the goal is tithe or give significantly on day one, fat chance with any of that. Get out of here, dude. Like, nobody did that with any other spiritual discipline on day one. Nobody said, I'm a master prayer warrior on day one.
Colin, you claim, right?
Maybe he did.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course.
Naturally.
So we got to treat it like a discipline, which means there's the first step and then there's the next step. And so we've got to help, I would say, our nonprofits and churches and ministries honestly craft that language of what is your generosity pathway look like? What is the next step for people to take? You don't even have to attach a dollar amount to it. People are smart enough to know that's my next step, so it's got to change what I give or what I do. So for nonprofit space, I think there's a pathway for that. I think in the church space, I'd encourage you guys to give people permission to start.
Good.
There's a lot of people who live with guilt who go to church who know they should give, and they don't because either they don't want to or they feel like they should give more and they can't because they're overwhelmed. Just start. It doesn't matter. Listen, there's no recession in heaven. Like the chickens and the hens and the eggs don't cost more there. Start, because it's less about the amount and it's more about what God is doing here in terms of asking you to trust him wherever you may be. And then when people do take a step, recognize it. So one of the adages that I learned in ministry, like, people replicate what you celebrate.
It's good.
So when someone takes a step, especially when it comes to giving to your ministry, your church, or nonprofit, recognize it and celebrate it.
Share the story. Tell the story.
Yeah.
Yep.
No one gives by accident. Yep. I think I said that already. So, man, here's one of the things that I would encourage ministry leaders and nonprofit leaders. Colin gives $5 to CNH, and I'm the ED or the pastor of CNH. I'm going to call him after I've written him a handwritten note. So this is part of my sequence, right? About 2 weeks after I know he's gotten the note, hey, man, this is Dave from CNH. Hey, did you get the letter? Yeah, man, cool. Thank you. Man, I just wanted to call and say thanks. Man, can I ask you a question? I promise you're not in trouble. Colin, nobody gives money away by accident. Dude, what is God doing in your space that caused you to give $5?
Yeah.
or whatever you gave, right? So notice the amount gets moved to the shelf, and now it becomes less about the transaction,
Yeah.
but transformational.
Great.
God is doing something in you. It's like, no one's ever asked me
That's
that.
great.
Deer in the headlights, I don't know what he's doing. Well, what'd you give? Maybe he is doing something. Holy cow. A spark of change and curiosity towards spiritual things are happening now. Again, donor cultivation. For young people, man, everyone's emotional about everything. When you can reframe that emotion and give them a context for how to think about it, I think that's a big thing. And then the last thing,
This
I've
is
been talking
amazing.
a lot.
This is good. Keep going.
The last thing would be people, I think, especially younger donors or emerging donors from a younger generation, like transparency in your involvement is essential. Here's what I mean. Do you give because you're an employee there, or do you give because you want to give there? So oftentimes, nonprofit leaders and pastors, there's the unspoken expectation that you give because you're part of the machine.
And you're asking everyone else to do it. And
so some of that may be true, right? And that's okay. However, and I do this at my church, about once a quarter, I will take off the jacket. Hey, Cornerstone, I give here. This is our offering moment. I give here. You might think that I give because I'm the pastor here. That's not why I give. Listen, believe it or not, as a pastor, my gas is still expensive and my taxes also went up along with my property insurance. I'm just like you. People forget that, right? So now I'm human. They can connect with me and I can connect with them. They can identify with me. And yet, I still choose to give in this place. Because here's what the Lord calls me to, but here's also how the Lord has been faithful in my life. And so I just demonstrate that authenticity, not because I'm a pastor, but because I'm a regular guy. I get to give here, not I have to give here.
Yeah.
And man, people identify with authenticity. In fact, they can smell it when it's inauthentic, and they're like,
Yeah.
"Bleh, I don't want to go there."
Especially Gen Z.
Oh, totally.
Especially Gen Z. They'll see it 4 miles away and they'll be out of there.
Yeah, it's a classic, mom and dad trying to promote kids ministry on stage and their kids, their own kids don't go. they hate it.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the problem? Let's not talk about it. Let's fix the problem and see why your kids don't attend it first. And then, but Dave, before this is good stuff, gold. Before we go, one more hot take, because we were talking about this earlier.
Go.
For nonprofits and churches, their tax exemption.
Yeah.
And where it's at now, some of kind of the hot air that's going around it and the tensions, and this is not official financial advice, attorney disclaimer, terms and conditions here. But where do you see it go? Where do you see the state of it now? Where is it going? What are the dangers, and how should organizations be preparing?
Yeah. So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not giving legal advice, nor am I a CFM, so I'm not giving financial advice.
Boom.
Here's what we know, right? We don't have to guess that, biblically speaking, it gets harder for the church. Now, in some parts of the world, it's really difficult now. And as bad as we think we have it in the U.S., it's not. It's not. Culturally speaking, it's not anywhere near what our brothers and sisters are enduring, like in East Asia or in parts of North Africa, South Africa, the Middle East, etc. That being said, what we can see is, look at the past as a predictor of the future. Are things getting better for the church institutionally? And that's an important distinction, because the gospel is growing better. And what we find historically is that in places where persecution breaks out, the gospel tends to break out too. All right. But institutionally, is it getting better for the church? And the answer is no. You can see where different conversations at a national level will have implications. And so you asked about tax exemption and stuff. My sense is, at some point, and we can see this from what's happened in Australia, what's happened in Canada, and what's happened in Western Europe. At some point, the church either becomes a state church and people's taxes fund it, and it does what it does, or you lose your exemption altogether and you figure it out. Our friends in Australia are a good case study for that. The churches have no tax exemption status there. So, you have to pay for your property tax on all things. What I would probably encourage people to look at is 2050. You've got time, but not a lot of time.
27 years to be exact. So call Dave.
Yeah, right. Maybe even before that, depending on how politics move and elections go and stuff like that. Again, regardless of who you vote for, what we're finding is things are not becoming favorable for the people of faith. And that's not unique just to the Christians, right? This is going to have implications on the Muslims who are tax exempt. That'll have implications on the Catholics, on the Buddhists, the Unitarians, who are all tax exempt. I think at some point, the religious circle of people of faith either gets absorbed into a tax line item, or it's like, suck it up. And this is, you are here to do charitable things, then do it regardless. What I would start encouraging people to think through is, if you do have property, and you do have to end up paying like property tax, I don't know how many churches would close today if they had to pay for property tax plus everything they're doing. So reimagine, again, this goes back to where we started, the selling of property. How can we redouble utilize our existing space Monday through Saturday for something else that's going to be for the greater good of our communities, but also generate potential income streams? And I know, like, if we do that today, we will end up paying taxes on that. Fine. But at least you're ahead of the curve. And then if you have surplus space or surplus land, reimagine it. Bring in other counsel, other people to help you think through what could be. Listen, if the day never comes, then then don't sweat it, right? The worst that happens, you have a lot of surplus cash. That's the worst that happens. But if it does come, here's my fear. I don't know how many churches and houses of faith will close because they lost their properties, not being able to sustain it. Start building into some of those things. Start thinking through, like, what would it look like to set a portion of something annually for that day, just in case. Again, I think by 2050, I would not be shocked if this happens in our lifetime. It happened in Australia in our lifetime. And what I'm seeing is the winds of change are blowing, and politically, it's not in the favor of God's people in either space, nonprofit or church. So just my opinion. One more time, I got to reiterate that. Just an opinion.
We're going to ping this episode, put a mark on it, and we're going to put Dave's email at the bottom. You can email him in 2050 and
told you
and
so.
say what a prophet or what a punk.
Right. In 27 years, you can either thank me or throw a rock at me. But one of those two.
Yeah. Well, Dave, listen, thank you so much, man. Great insight, and I know it's helpful to our listeners. Before we go, where can they find you? How can they reach you? What are the best places?
Yeah. I think email david.lopez@generis.com is the easiest place to reach me. Yeah, I think that would be it, man.
Yeah, for those listening, be sure to reach out with your needs. We're going to put all the links to Dave's contacts and websites and organizations he is currently serving through. And thank you for being a mentor from up close, from up far, and for many years now. And I think there's so many stories that we'll probably have to do a special episode on all the dirt that I've got on Dave. You know what I'm saying? Not the other way.
Fine.
Not the other way
That's
around.
cool.
Not the
He
other way.
seems like he'll hit back, though.
Yeah.
No doubt.
I think
You better be ready if you throw.
I think-
I
but
throw
we-
rocks too.
But we value your time, listeners. Thank you so much. And remember, don't go alone. If you want to go far, you do not want to go alone. Let's go together. We're here to help you grow faster and go further. Thank you for listening to the Nonprofit Renaissance, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks again for listening to the Nonprofit Renaissance. We hope it ignites a renaissance in you and helps you go further and grow faster. Be sure to share, rate, and subscribe. And if you'd like to recommend or be a guest on our show, send us an email at podcast@versecreative.com.